Alright, so I think it's only fair that we start this particular conversation by laying our cards on the table. So, Laughing Man, Katie, is it true that the two of you think that Season 2 of True Detective was completely for the birds? It was a massive letdown after the first season?
Well, I feel like I'm more neutral about it, to be completely honest.
No, Max pretty much hit the nail on the head, except I'm biased, but still.
Oh, okay. So we have
Season 2 did suck. It put me to sleep, seriously.
Okay, so we kind of have three different opinions here, which is good. Honestly, I'm neutral. Matt doesn't like it, and Max is favorable.
Well, again, I'm biased, but I'll present my case eventually.
Okay,
so.
Well, I guess as a neutral person, I can just kind of I don't know. I mean, like, after watching through season 1, I remember thinking this was a really great story. I was really into it the whole time, and I was really engaged. I really enjoyed the characters. I thought they were well written. I thought that the mystery was intriguing. I just loved it. And then I went on to watch season 2 recently, and I didn't get that same feeling when I finished it. I really did enjoy the characters, and there were moments in the mystery when I was like, oh, where's this going to go? This is really, really interesting. But then at the end, I just left feeling kind of underwhelmed and confused. And I was like, I couldn't really grasp why that was. I was like, okay, the characters I really liked, and the mystery was just like, I felt like there was too much going on. So I went back, rewatched up to episode 3 and didn't get through the whole of it, but I still can't really pinpoint why it didn't work for me.
Well, first I gotta get my bias out of the way. I've been reading Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow before it was cool, so the minute I heard the King in Yellow, or the Yellow King in the show, and the mention of Carcosa, I was, as Max would politely put it, jacking myself off dry. But besides that, I love the first season. I mean, most people do if you check all the reviews and what a lot of people are saying on, the entertainment news, media press, whatever. Matthew McConaughey really captivated me right from the get-go. The character of Russ Cole, kind of spoke to me. It was like, this guy who puts all his cards on the table and doesn't let anything slip by, and he points out the human stupidity. But then also the entire season seemed to have a forward momentum behind this voodoo killing cult thing, which was very Lovecraftian, mentions of Robert W. Chambers, King in Yellow, etc., things that I liked. So again, I'm biased. Season 2, however, just never connected with me in the same way. I tried to give it its chance. I watched all the episodes through. Beyond the second or third episodes, I kind of lost a lot of interest, so I was kind of doing other things while I was watching the show, So I could be totally out of the loop, but I could not get into it. It was just too much character motivation, too much focusing on individual characters. It was like, and I like Catcher in the Rye, where you have a character-based story where there's not really a central plot. It's more about progressing characters forward. This was progressing about 4 to 5 characters forward, and to me it felt like there's no central plot.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Or at least a very, very weak one that wasn't really the focus of the series. So
right. See, this is actually why I enjoyed season 2 of True Detective so much, because, well, I think it's only fair that we start by acknowledging the fact that season 2 of True Detective, for the most part, is nothing like season 1,
mm-hmm.
Which I think is a good thing, although I think this is also the main reason why a lot of people disliked it, because I remember right after the first episode of season 2 aired, and after watching it, I decided to go on the internet to look up some interesting information about it, some trivia and whatnot. And the first thing I saw was a bunch of negative reviews saying, "Oh my god, this is nothing like the first season. Where's Matthew McConaughey? Where's the nihilism? I'm not gonna watch the rest of this shit." And it's like, really? After just one episode?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it had an uphill battle. Trying to top the second season, to try to even come close to topping the first was going to be an uphill battle.
Which is why I appreciate the part that they took it into an entirely different direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Because in this era of incessant sequels, remakes, reboots, HBO and the creator of the show, Nick Pizzolatto, could have easily tried to capitalize on the success of the first season. It's like, you know what, it was meant to be a standalone story, but let's continue the adventures of Rust and Marty just because people liked it. So I respect the fact that they decided to stick to their guns and do something different. And here's the thing. People had known that it was going to be an entirely different beast from day one, because in all of the interviews and various articles and whatnot, they talked about how season 2 is not going to be a continuation of season 1. Instead, True Detective, the show itself, is going to be it's kind of like American Horror Story, where each season is an entirely different standalone narrative.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Max on this one, because I think that it worked really well in some ways, that they didn't just copy season 1. I think, honestly, if they did just, either they brought back a lot of the nihilism or they brought back the same characters, I wouldn't have been as interested. When I saw that season 2 was completely new cast, completely new storyline, everything like that, I was more intrigued for it, because I was like, okay, what are they going to do with this? Where are these characters going to take us, and things like that.
And I'm on the same boat as you guys. I did not like season 2, but I also respected the fact that they were going to do something different. They're going to do a different story. They were going to do, again, an anthology series with a new cast. I mean, I knew all this from the get-go. And the way that they hyped up the series, everyone creates their own hell, or everyone creates the world they deserve, or whatever the hell they were trying to pitch it as. It's like, oh, that might be pretty cool. I wonder what kind of weird direction they're going to go with this one. I wonder what kind of interesting characters we're going to have. And it fell flat on both of those in my account. But
I would disagree about the part where, the characters create the world they deserve. Now, obviously, this is
that's because that's an actual quote by Colin Farrell's
yes,
character.
but I feel like it worked. And spoiler alert, obviously, I hope nobody's watching this if you haven't actually seen all of
go ahead and spoil season 2, as we're spoiling. Nothing happens.
I feel like that tagline of you create the world you deserve, at least for 2, okay, this is going to get into one of the problems I had with it, but at least for 2 of the characters in the end, for Ray and Frank, they ended up dying. And for me, I feel like that's what should have happened to them, because both of them had gotten into some pretty shady stuff, especially Frank, and so in the end, they got what they deserved in a way. And I felt like for those characters, the way that ended for them really fit. So,
and I have no problem with downer endings either. It's not, and I don't have an issue with some of the main characters not surviving. Not a big deal.
But like, I guess we can just jump into one of the problems that I had with it. I feel like season 2 could have been a lot stronger if we didn't have 4 main characters plus a bunch of minor characters.
Yes.
And I was watching through again season 2 and taking notes on it, and honestly, what I found was that overall, Paul, I believe is his name, he's the cop on the motorcycle.
The closet case.
Yeah, he was the flattest, weakest character out of all of them. His story to me seemed very uninteresting and kind of a little flat. It's like the 2 things he had going for them was that he was in this, controversial Black Mountain thing going on, like the secret group that apparently did some bad stuff, and then also he was gay and he was dealing with that. I mean, and those things could have been interesting as character arc, but I feel like he was honestly a pretty unneeded character, because in his storyline, like, he finds the body in episode 1, so that's what his big important thing is, and then in episode 2, he's kind of told the same thing as the female character Annie is told, where the police chiefs are like, oh, you gotta, keep an eye on this Ray guy, because we don't know what this other city is doing, what this Vinci city is doing, so gotta kind of spy on them and see what happens.
Plus, Ray's also a crooked cop, so...
Well, but I mean, that, for me, I felt like his character was really intriguing, and I liked what was going on, but, with Paul, it's like, okay, you just told 2 characters do the same thing. Why do we need 2 characters doing this? We could just focus on 1. And then in episode 3, he's the one that, he looks at Casper's records or something, is like, oh, well, he was, spending money at this place, or, here's the phone records for this place. One of the other characters could have done that. And I feel like in writing, it's better if you only have characters as a part of the story if they're absolutely necessary. If you have a character that's there, but you could take them out of the story and the story overall doesn't change, maybe that character isn't needed. Or if that character's there but the things that they're doing in the story could be just as easily done by another character, maybe you don't need that character. So
Well, here's the thing. Speaking of story and narrative, I think before we begin discussing characters in depth, I think one thing that's worth bringing up as a comparison between season 1 and season 2, or rather the difference between the two seasons, is the fact that what season 1 had working for it was the fact that, don't forget that pretty much the first half of season 1 was flashbacks. We had two timelines, the past, I forget what year it was, and then the present, which was 2012. So for at least the first half of season 1, you had these two characters, Russ and Marty. We see where they end up in 2012, and then both of them go back and reminisce about the way they started, and you have, Marty talking about what's like, oh yeah, this guy Rouse, we called him the tax man because he would always show up with his folder and a notepad and write notes and whatnot. And so for the first half, we kind of get almost like the Cliff Notes version of their investigation, where you see the highlights. Where, okay, first we went this, and then we met this guy and we interrogate him about the regular do, and this and that, and then as they conduct their investigation, you also see how this investigation affects their lives. And again,
Yes.
we get to see the Cliff Notes version, because I think like in the first episode, Marty's kids, they're like 6 and 4, something like that. They're pretty young, whereas by the time we get to the middle of the first season, they're already teenagers, at least the younger daughter, and that's when she becomes the bad apple. She gets involved with a bunch of shady characters and whatnot. So I think that's an important difference, the fact that not only did season 1 have less main characters, than the second season, but
And more time to focus on each one.
yes, but it also had a more streamlined, I guess, timeline, because again, the first thing you see in season 1 is you see where both Russ and Marty end up in the future or in the present, so you're immediately intrigued to see how they ended up there.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. Telling the story out of chronological order gave us hook after hook after hook after hook to keep us watching. It's like, oh god, what the hell happened to this Russ Cole guy? He looks so different now and then. What did this investigation do to him and his psyche to create this kind of absolute nihilist, charming nihilist that everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people just absolutely adore.
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily that the way that the narrative was told is like what completely trashed season 2. I mean, like, I don't think that they needed to go back to that kind of flashback sort of setup. I mean, it definitely worked for season 1, but you don't have to tell a story that way for it to be intriguing. You can have just a completely chronological story, here's the beginning, here's the end, and you don't really go back and forth. You can have that.
Yeah, you can have your little Disney linear narrative.
I mean, plenty of narratives work that way. I mean,
I know. I'm just saying that it's.
I mean, yes, I think
well,
that
it depends. It depends on the story.
Yeah.
You can't tell even the Maltese Falcon or even a Scooby-Doo mystery out of chronological order for some detective stories. It just makes sense for it to be linear.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that with season 1, it was unique the way that the story was told, and so I think that that's something that definitely stood out to a lot of people.
Actually, no, I have to take that back, because some detective stories start with the body's already there on the ground, and you have to investigate people and get their stories and work backwards.
Yeah.
And then you also have Columbo, where we already know who the killer is, and it's more about how Columbo's going to catch him. So
Yeah, exactly. The inspector comes in, and yeah, exactly.
But the reason I brought up the difference between season 1 and the way the narrative was conducted in season 1 and season 2 is because one of the major complaints people have about season 2 is that the vast majority of screen time was dedicated to character exploration, the exploration of the 4 main characters. And when they talk about season 1, they almost look at it through nostalgia goggles.
Yeah.
Like they keep saying it's like, oh, it was all about the mystery, man. It was all about the investigation. It's like, well, no, there was also a lot of character development. The difference is the way
You actually cared about season 1's characters. That's the difference.
Well, now
your petty insults of season 2's characters aside, what I'm trying to say here is that season 1 managed to better balance out the murder mystery, the investigation, as well as the way the investigation affected the main characters, whereas in season 2, the investigation was almost like a framework to have this character analysis / character study of sorts. And to be fair, they kind of tried to do the whole flashback thing in the beginning, because I think I think that's the way the show starts the second season, where we see a flashback to Ray when he was just a patrol officer, and he meets with Frank, and Frank gives him information about his wife's rapist and whatnot, and that's kind of how the entire thing starts. And then we fast forward to the future. So I kind of thought we were going to get more of that, but the thing is, with those particular characters, the 4 main characters of season 2, we didn't really need to go back that far into the past, well, aside from Ray, obviously.
Yeah.
Because in the case of, like, Tyler Kitsch's character, there was really no need to explore his days in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever he was. Because if they had flashback to that, that would have been just jarring. It's like, why are we all of a sudden getting flashbacks to his days in the military? It's like, all we need to know is that he did some shady shit.
Yeah, I think I definitely completely agree with Max on this one. And I feel like the reason behind that is that it's the number of characters. In season 2, we had so many characters, and I feel like 8 episodes was not enough
to flesh out all the characters.
Yeah, to completely explore all of these characters. And so in the end, like in episode 7 or 6 or 7 or whichever episode it is that Paul dies, I hadn't really connected with his character enough by that point to really feel anything when he died. It was just like, oh no. But then I didn't really feel anything. But meanwhile, in the final episode when Ray and Frank died, I was like, no, oh no, that sucks.
Yeah,
you know?
Okay, here's the thing: is that there's definitely some strong characters. Ray and Frank, they were great characters. They were actually properly developed, and I think if it was just Ray, Frank, and that one tough police lady, it would have been a much stronger series, because you wouldn't have gone over that threshold that kind of made 2 unique. I mean, granted, yes, or made season 1 unique. Season 1, sure, it had the character development, and it focused heavily on the characters of Russ Cole and of Marty.
And also his wife, Marty's wife, also played a large
part. Because Marty's wife is part of Marty and Russ Cole's falling out, obviously. So you get these 3 characters, and they're pretty solid. You know, you get to know them, and then you get to see how this investigation fucks with them, how it gives them the character arch to, progress their characters, obviously. But season 2, just too many cooks in the kitchen, too many hands in the soup. I don't know what the hell the analogy you want to use.
Too many cooks spoiled the broth.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It was just too many people trying to concentrate on too many people, too many different plot lines, too many red herrings, to make it really you really connect with all the characters. I mean, there's like the Paul character. He gets slammed a lot for being a very tropish, in the closet type of character, and a lot of the stuff I felt he just wasn't really needed in.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. I mean, honestly, I feel like if we had like the 2 cops and then the criminal, because we'll have Ray and Annie, and like their interactions were pretty interesting, honestly. Like I felt like the way that those characters worked together was very intriguing, and just the back and forth between them I liked. And then then we have Frank, who is he's just a straight up criminal, and so that it would be interesting because we have Annie, who is the good cop. We have Ray, who is the bad cop. He's kind of good, kind of bad because he's working with Frank. And we have Frank, who's just kind of straight. I mean, he's just straight up a shady guy. And so I think that balance right there would have been really interesting, because then we would have had the cop stuff going on, but then we would have also had Ray going back and forth between the cop stuff and the gangster stuff, which is what he already does kind of in the series. But as for the red herring stuff, I definitely agree, because we have, through Paul, we have this stuff with like this Black Mountain, and so we're wondering about what that's about, and then we have this.
Then we have the prostitution ring that's very, very wide shut, and then we have what else do we have? We have like multiple corrupt city cops and city officials, and we have that one mafia-esque rich kid and the father, and then you have just, I don't know, it just keeps on getting piled up more and more and more, and all these little bits just keep on. A lot of them just felt like they're unresolved. Like one of the best examples is the cult, the father of Tough Lady, can't remember her name. That's how memorable these characters are.
Well, to you,
to me,
for all of us.
What's her name? Annie.
Yeah.
Okay, so Annie's father runs what sounds like a doomsday cult. And I was thinking, oh, well, if it's going to be kind of like in the same vein, and I made that mistake of season 1, that must be something to have to do with this doomsday cult and this Eyes Wide Shut thing. Maybe it's some type of, what do you call it, the Grove. There's that actual Californian cult thing where they worship a big owl. Anyways, I thought it was going to be something along those lines, and I was totally off base. And here's the problem, is there's a philosophy in writing that says if you say there's a gun on the wall in one of the earlier chapters, that gun needs to go off by the end of the story. Basically, it means don't include things unless it contributes to the resolution. Otherwise, it could be an effective red herring, sure, but it also leaves the reader unsatisfied. What we had here was not a gun waiting to go off. It felt like a string of firecrackers that popped at different intervals and left me without that big bang resolution I'd hoped for.
Yeah, see, the thing is, Chekhov's gun is a great thing to keep in your mind once you write a story, and yes, if you're going to establish something, it better have a payoff, but the thing is, if you just go by the Chekhov's gun, you're going to end up with a pretty bare-bones, subpar story where it's like, okay, here's the beginning, here's the middle, here's the end. You need something on top of that.
Possibly.
And as far as the cult goes, I think the reason that was included was basically the author's way of trolling the audience.
And it trolled me, yeah.
Again, you're gonna say, well, it's like, well, it's a red herring, but here's the thing, because straight from, and I also, at least for the very first episode, I also bought it because you see the victim, Casper, right?
Yep.
You see him being transported out of his house, and it's just this withered old man. He's in the back of the car, and they're going somewhere, and then like at one point, he kind of falls over, and it's like, okay, this guy's obviously dead. And then he's placed into that position, and you see that the killer has like this
Raven mask.
Raven mask, and it's like, okay, there we go. This is True Detective.
Oh, so it's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not Robert W. Chambers this time. It's something like it by Edgar Allan Poe or something. You know, so you're flipping through Edgar Allan Poe stuff, trying to find the connections, hoping that maybe the author's doing another kind of nod to a popular.
Well, see, maybe you were doing.
I was doing this. Yes, I was doing this.
The same thing with the cult, because when the cult was introduced, I would wager 90% of the audience probably thought, oh my god, that's where the story is going, it's that conspiracy, it's the cult is doing it. But why were people thinking this? Because that's what happened in season 1. It was all about the cult. But even then, it wasn't really about the cult, because by the time Russ and Marty catch up with the cult is already effectively disbanded. You have a couple of ex-members, like the senator, whom Russ blackmails at the end of the season and whatnot in order to, he steals the VHS tape from him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That finally convinces Marty that Rust was actually onto something this entire time. But the cult itself, this is what I liked about the cult. It wasn't this massive Illuminati organization that pulled all these strings in Louisiana or even all the United States. No, it's just some ancient pagan religion that kind of survived, but it's real. But it's very, very underground, and most people think it's just an urban legend and whatnot. And most people don't even know about the Yellow King and Carcosa and whatnot, etc. But I think that was the cult a red herring? Yes. And again, I think that was just basically the author trolling the audience because that's what everyone was anticipating. Because if something worked the first time, you gotta redo it again, but make it bigger and better and more spectacular and add more CGI. That's basically the success formula in Hollywood these days.
Yes.
Like season 1 of True Detective was Rust and Marty versus the Yellow King, whereas the second one is going to be them versus the esoteric cult of Dagon. That's a reference to all you Lovecraft fans.
Hoot.
But see, at this point, the entire series would have basically transformed from True Detective into fucking X-Files.
Yeah, I agree.
But again, I mean, it never would have gone super supernatural because it never went down that route. It just gave a couple winks and nods, and maybe there's something bigger behind the scenes. But again, you're chasing rednecks. If you're watching True Detective and you're pissed off that there was no King and Yellow God, it was just some lawnmower man, then that's like getting pissed off that the Hounds of the Baskervilles didn't have a real ghost dog. It's like, buddy, this is Sherlock Holmes. There's a rational explanation.
Yeah, that's not the point of the story.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I felt slightly overwhelmed at the ending of season 1 because it was like, oh, it's just some redneck. I expected like something slightly more than just one guy. I didn't want.
There's a little hint though that there might be something behind the curtains pulling the strings. It's not flat out implied. There's no supernatural stuff though, but you never know.
Yeah, I didn't want there to be, but I I remember feeling, I was like, oh, it's just, like, I wish that there was something a little bit more, but as for the cult stuff in season 2, I agree that it was probably just like a bit of a trolling on the director's part, which is fine.
Especially when he starts talking about how the nihilistic philosophy behind that cult. I'm like, oh, there's some nods to season 1.
Yeah, but my problem...
Well, I didn't even get a very nihilistic vibe from that cult, because they were just a bunch of fucking hippies.
Yeah, but they also said, that there's no point in existence or something along those lines. I'd have to rewatch that episode, but...
Yeah, that was one of the problems that I had with the cult red herring thing, because we had this, like, Annie has this flashback after she goes into the whole prostitute ring thing, and she's trying to like infiltrate that and sneak in there and find the missing girl, and then she has this flashback to this guy, and it turns out, well, no, her father has like this picture of this guy, and I think that, like, also there was somebody else in the picture, I can't remember who it was, but it's like, okay, I was expecting that to go somewhere, and it never does. So it's like, okay, what was the point of this particular face, and like, why are we shown this photo, and then it goes back to it
wasn't the guy who molested her as a kid, was it?
Well, it was, but it's like, then it goes back to what you said earlier, Matt, where it's like, okay, if the gun's on the wall, we're going to do something with it. So yes. I was expecting this photo or this man to have something to do with it.
Like, he might be the guy who's behind the Raven mask or something.
Not even that. It's just like, what is this going to do for the story? And it never does anything. Now,
yes.
If it had just stopped at the point where Annie remembers that she was molested as a kid, that would be fine, because it's like, okay, that adds something to the character. It's gonna, like, now maybe this explains why she's so kind of averse to sexual stuff.
Well, that's why that's the reason why it was there. It's an explanation why she's so averse to sex and sexuality and whatnot.
Why she has to dominate men, and why she has to, like, protect herself against other men, and why she has to be able to,
and why she was mad at her
walls.
sister. So mad at her sister, and she's like, I would rather you be doing drugs than the sex stuff. But where I'm going with this is that it's like, okay, if you had just left it at that, but the way it was built up, to me, it felt like it was built up in such a way that I was expecting something else to happen with this particular bit of information, and it never does. So I felt like the way that was presented was it didn't work for me.
See, I cannot know this for sure because I don't know Nick Pizzolatto, the author, personally. I don't know the man, but the thing is, and this is where the audience might accuse me of pulling shit out of my ass, but I think, like, because I've read through his biography, and he used to be, like, a literature professor at university, and originally, he's, like, a legit author. He's written some books, some novels.
Plagiarized some Thomas Ligotti.
Well...
Sorry, got through that in there.
But anyway, so the thing is, like, from what I've read, originally True Detective was supposed to be a novel, but then... at the time when he was writing it, was originally it was meant to be a sequel to an earlier book he wrote, but then he got into television. He was a writer on a show called The Killing and whatnot. So after gaining some experience in the industry, he decided that True Detective would work better as a TV show. Now, here's the thing. If I were in Nick Pizzolatto's position, in addition to writing a great story, a great murder mystery and whatnot, I wouldn't hesitate to include some of my worldviews into that story, and I think this is where a lot of the Thomas Ligotti stuff comes from, because here's something interesting. Again, I've read Nick Pizzolatto's biography, and it turns out that the guy, that he himself was actually born and raised in Louisiana, where season 1 of True Detective was
taking place.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when describing his hometown, he said the following, quote, "Lots of poor, stupid people there, lots of drinking and fighting and cheating. Also, lots of fanatical religion and illiteracy. It's a rough place, and you grow up fighting." I wonder if this had any effect on the way he wrote season 1 of True Detective.
Yes, and how he probably based Russ Cole on his own opinions of those observations.
Yeah, I think he also. I think I read somewhere that Russ Cole was in part based on a professor he had in university. So again, in addition to writing a compelling murder mystery, the season 1 of True Detective was also more than that, because when True Detective season 1 was first released, people weren't really talking about the murder mystery. It's like, oh my god, it's so fascinating. It's like people were fascinated with the King in Yellow, but that's because, it's the King in Yellow. And also people were fascinated with Russ Cole, because if you go on YouTube, there's a video that's like a compilation of
There's multiple compilations of his philosophy.
Yeah, and the most popular one has about like, let's see, 466,880 views. So don't tell me that season 1 was fascinating just because it was about the cult and the mystery. No, there was more to it.
Right, it had great characters too.
Yes, and great worldviews, which I think were, at least in part, the worldviews of the author Nick Pizzolatto himself. And I think he also did the same thing with season 2, although this time it was less about religion and more about other stuff, because I remember Reason.com even published an article saying stuff like how True Detective season 2 might be the most libertarian TV show ever.
The rich people win. Sorry. Common libertarian criticism is the oligarchy one.
Which was, in a sense, a part of season 2, but there was also other stuff. For example, you take Rachel McAdams' character, Annie, and the reason I like the character because she was a walking subversion of what Aaron Curry refers to as the roundhouse kicking chick cop. You know, the kind you would see in daytime crime shows like CSI or Law and Order, where she's just like this 5'2", 100 pounds female cop.
Fit shaming.
Shh, I'm not done. Who can easily take down a 6'7" Hell's Angels biker with a swift karate chop, and all the other male cops in the precinct are in love with her. It's like, oh my god, Annie, you're so badass and whatnot. And then she's like, oh, tee hee hee, boys will be boys. And then she, skims off to have a date with a rich banker or doctor and whatnot. Basically, she's like a total Mary Sue character. Mm-hmm. Whereas in True Detective, she was pretty much as fucked up as the rest of the characters.
Oh, yeah.
Which I loved. And I also loved all the stuff about, sexual harassment and whatnot. There's like a scene towards the end where the guy she was seeing in the beginning of the season, he files like a sexual harassment lawsuit.
On her.
On her, yes, exactly. And she's like, this would never happen to a man. And her boss gives her this like, are you shitting me look? It's like, bitch, you can bet your ass this would happen to a guy.
This would happen to a guy like 9 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm. But of course, the great Tumblr crowd overlooked all of that, and they still extol her as a hashtag Hugo Girl character. But she wasn't. That was the point of that character. Like, a woman like her, she wouldn't decide to become a tough-as-nails cop because she had a happy-go-lucky childhood. And that was the reason why the whole molestation thing was brought up, and why she was so averse to sex, which was what Reason talked about when they talked about great libertarian moments, because in episode 1 we are introduced to that character when she's leading a raid on what she thinks is like a prostitution ring, and then it turns out that it's just a legitimate, webcam porn business and whatnot, and then
where nobody gets hurt, nobody even gets touched.
Yeah, but she still chastises her sister because, like, I'd rather you be dead, from drug overdose than doing porn and whatnot. It's like, bitch, calm down.
Yeah.
She's just finger blasting herself on a webcam. And the same thing with the whole Eyes Wide Shut cult. In any other show, especially if it were CSI or Law and Order, they would have probably portrayed the whole thing as like a white slavery racket of some sorts, where all of these women are kidnapped and they're
slave trade.
Yeah, and they're forced to have sex for no pay. Whereas in this case, when Annie and the rest of the characters, they save the Hispanic girl.
In quotes.
Well, saved in quotes, but anyways. Her reaction is, what the fuck, I was there out of my own volition. It's like, that's what she enjoys doing. She enjoys going to these parties, getting high, getting fucked, and getting paid, because they were paid. This was legitimate. It's like, so what? Mm-hmm. A couple of rich guys want to hire a bunch of escorts to fuck and get high and whatnot. Who's being hurt? What's the big deal? But whereas in something like Law and Order, you would have probably had a scene where this Hispanic girl would have been crying. It's like, oh my god, I was torn away from my family.
Thank you for saving me from those horrible rich people.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And also Vince Vaughn's character too, Frank, where he basically started from as low as he could possibly go and then rose to the very top on his own volition, on his own determination, and his own work. another great libertarian moment. I mean, he had a father who, locked him in the basement for days on end, and he still managed to rise up to become, a powerful figure and eventually a legitimate figure.
Well, he's trying. It sounds like he was trying to get legitimate, but then after Casper dies, then his whole plan just
fell to
falls. Shit, yeah.
That's why I like the character of Frank so much, because you could argue about the legitimacy of his actions. Like, well, he was a criminal. Yeah, but not everyone is dealt the same hand of cards in life, so to speak.
Exactly.
He tried to make the best of his situation. And to be fair, he did try to go legit with this whole Casper deal. So if it were not for the twins killing Casper, he would have probably gotten his own way. And let's not forget that compared to the other mobsters we see in the season, Frank is like the lesser of how many evils?
Yeah.
Like, he's not the worst one there is. So that's what I like about True Detective, that it's not all black and white, it's shades of gray.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and you see in the very last episode with that the barmaid who was talking about Frank, she's like, yeah, he's actually a really nice guy, like, he gave me money to start this place and he never asked for it back and things like that. And so that it kind of speaks to...
Whereas in any other show, and I know I keep saying this, but only because it's true, Frank would have been a one-dimensional mobster, smoking a cigar, counting his money, slapping his wife around, just because, they would try to hammer down the message of crime does not pay.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing with Colin Farrell's character, by the way, Ray. Again, in any other show, he would have been a one-dimensional, abusive husband, and the wife would have been portrayed as this innocent victim who got a restraining order against him because he was abusing her. But in reality, despite the fact that he does kill whom he thought was the wife's rapist, his ex-wife is a massive cunt with no redeeming qualities, and that's what I loved. Because in any other show, they would have probably tried to set up the fact that it was Frank blackmailing her to act this way, like she really loved Ray.
Oh, God, yeah.
But no. Instead, she doesn't want to see Ray because he thinks he's a monster. Instead, she finds herself some sort of nice guy in order to pay for everything. And because Ray is not around, you see that their child, who was actually Ray's child, but because Ray is not in this kid's life, you see that he grows up to be a spineless fat fuck who cannot even defend himself.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then you have that scene where he actually tries to spend some time with his kid, but there's the CPS officer sitting there.
Oh, God, yeah, that was so awkward.
Yeah.
And how uncomfortable it is. He just tries to bond with his kid, and like he puts his arm on the kid's shoulder, and the CPS officer immediately starts to write something down like, he tried to touch the child and the child was visibly uncomfortable. He needs to be restrained and put in jail right now because #KillOmen.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that about Ray's character. You saw those moments where he was with his son, and I mean, you had the moments also where he was like, going and beating up the news reporter and things like that, or going and beating up this other kid's dad.
Yeah,
which was fucking great.
I know, I love that. That was one of my favorite parts.
I know, that was awesome.
I'll rape your dad with your mom's headless corpse.
Yes, that was it.
Again, in any other show, the message would have been #stop bullying, bullying never pays and whatnot. In this case, no, you fucking touch my son, you get punched in the face. That's the message. And speaking of Paul, Taylor Kitsch's character, again, as far as characters go...
Yeah, I was going to bring this up. I was going to be like, and Paul, chirp, 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 he's gay, right?
But here's the thing, two moments that I absolutely loved about his characters, about his storyline. Not so much his character, but the storyline. Number one, the mother is a failed alcoholic. I think she's like an ex-stripper and whatnot. Point is, she's a single mother who tried to raise him and whatnot, and then he comes back from a war zone, risking his life. He comes back with these savings that he then wants to build a new life for himself and his fiance. But then turns out that, guess what? The mother took all the money because, well, if it weren't for me, you would never be born, so I'm entitled to that money. And it's like, fuck you, bitch.
Hey, that's like the most accurate representation of the entire social security system ever.
Yeah, I did love that because I love his line was something like, I hid it for you to find or something like that, and it was like, oh damn, like I loved that.
But I mean, that's another one of those great libertarian moments too, is the fact that this guy goes to war, saves all this money up, and this older woman basically takes it from him and says that, oh, you owe it to me because I birthed you.
Yeah, she thinks that she's entitled to
it.
it.
Entitled is the key fucking word.
And the second memorable moment from Paul's character, and I'm not sure if a lot of people caught this, but notice how his girlfriend got quote-unquote accidentally pregnant the moment their relationship became on the rocks. And he even asks her, but I thought you were on on birth control? And her answer is, well, they don't work 100%. Fucking bullshit, they do.
She got herself pregnant so that she can keep him around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, oh, let's get married. This is the best thing that could happen to us. Yeah, but I mean, like, while we're on Paul's character, I do want to stress that, like, I didn't think he was a badly written character.
He was just weak.
I did like him. He wasn't as strong as the other characters. I didn't get attached to him, and honestly, I felt that overall he was unneeded to the story because, again, as I'm watching through it, I'm imagining, like, okay, if we took Paul out of this scene or we took Paul out of this scenario, would the story be able to continue just as easily as it had if, he was replaced with another character who wasn't there at all? And my answer was, I found that was always yes.
Well, here's the thing about Paul. With so many wonderful, in quotes, women in his life, is it any surprise that he decided to go gay?
Aw. But no, really, I mean, like, I don't know, like, what do you guys feel about that? Because originally, as I was watching through, I felt, well, maybe Frank's character isn't needed. But then, as I'm watching through again, I'm like, no, actually, his character is so good.
No, Frank, Ray, and Annie were desperately needed, and it should just been them three.
Yeah. I know, exactly, because I'm watching, I'm like, there's just so many crucial moments that involve Frank interacting with, mostly Ray. I mean, he never really interacts with Annie at all until the very final episode. There's one scene with them. But, like, his relationship with Ray was so powerful, and so it was needed for the plot. You couldn't have that same story without him, so it's like, yeah, he's there.
Yeah, when Ray shows up on Frank's door and, says, you gave me the wrong guy, and you made me basically kill a guy for you.
Yeah, oh god, that scene was so tense. I loved the way that they played out that scene where they both had guns under the table. Yeah. That was fantastic.
And you can also see if they both have, like, a mutual respect for each other, and that was a legitimate fuck-up, and Frank corrected it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I love his correction of it, too.
But yeah, because one thing Frank says as Ray's about to leave is like, here's the thing. It's like, right now you're probably the only friend I have in this world. And Ray's response is, well, isn't that fucked up? And then later on, when Ray introduces Annie to Frankie, Ray's own words, you know what? Aside him being a criminal, he's actually not that bad a guy. So it's a really interesting relationship the two of them had,
Well, it just goes to show, like you said, there's no black and white.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, even though the two of them were technically on the opposite side of the law, crook and cop.
But, again, I gotta go back. The characters are good. The characters are fairly well fleshed out. I really wish they had either more episodes or take Paul out of the equation to give these characters more to do, and more to do towards the case. I kept on feeling like we spent way too much time with Ray and his kid, and Frank trying to regain his empire, and all this other stuff, rather than trying to figure out what the core premise is, and that's that this guy got killed.
Well, no, now I disagree. I feel like the amount of time that we spent with each character was just fine, but I feel like the plot, the underlying plot itself was just, it was very messy. We're led in all these different directions.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm saying. That's what I'm kind of saying. I mean, sure, I would like to keep, the same amount of character development, maybe sans Paul, or at least have a couple more episodes to flesh Paul out a little better, but have more about the actual case. Because again, going back to season 1, it had a defined mystery: who is the Yellow King and why is he killing these women? And sure, the hunt for the Yellow King led to backwash cults and biker gangs and meth heads that were all, it all had some type of like forward progression towards finding out who's doing these horrific voodoo killings. Everything seemed to push towards answering a question, and whether or not it was a ultimately satisfying one is a completely different matter. But it still had that forward momentum.
Oh yeah.
Throughout the entire thing. And here, and again, I missed a lot of the little details that Max is going to bring up. I can just sense it. because I started to lose interest in the show because it was just too much character development, too much Catcher in the Rye, as much as I love Catcher in the Rye, type storytelling rather than trying to get to the end of a plot.
Well, now here I gotta say real quick, I disagree with that because, like, I feel like in season 1, you're right. All of these things that we got to see them investigating, we had the biker cult, we had the cult, we had, like, all this different stuff. It all led to one place. However, in season 2, we have a bunch of smaller individual questions. Like, okay, in the first episode, we have this missing girl, and so now Annie is going to be she's going to be investigating this missing girl. And then we have Frank, and he has this guy Osip who he's making a deal with. And is Osip the guy that killed Casper, and what's going on with that? And then there's, like, all these people who are cheating him out of a land deal. What's going on with that? And then with Paul, we have, okay, what's this Black Mountain thing going on? Is that what's happening with that? And then with Ray, we have, okay, is the guy that he killed actually the killer of his wife? And, like, so it's like all these individual questions for individual characters leading in all different directions instead of...
And some of those directions end in dead ends.
That, or I felt like, honestly, a lot of them were just really coincidental. Like, this missing girl, like, they happen to deliver this letter to this family who happens to have a missing sister who happens to have gone to the place that her dad, like, leads. It's like, that's a lot of coincidence for me. It didn't really feel very believable.
Here's the thing: I will agree that the plot of season 2 is more, or the mystery of season 2 is more convoluted than the mystery in season 1.
Yes.
But I think I would argue that was almost intentional, because let's compare the scope of the events in season 1 and season 2. In season 1, it's Russ and Marty versus this one obscure backroads cult in Louisiana, and it wasn't even technically the cult who was doing the killings. It was just this one kid who was raised in the cult, and he was carrying on their tradition, if you will.
And he was also like a meth king too, or something, because all the meth heads and the bikers all feared the guy. Sorta. So it was like a crazed drug dealer who was worshiping this obscure pagan religion of the Yellow King and whatnot. So it's pretty easy. Well, it wasn't easy for Russ and Marty to crack the case, but it was possible for them to crack the case at the very end and figure out who it was. And even though the cult did feature some prominent politicians and whatnot, again, the cult didn't really have much control over the entirety of Louisiana or the United States and whatnot. Whereas... It's just, they were just, killing like dozens and dozens of girls every year. So
yeah, it was only in that one. It was only in specific areas, and we see this where they're looking at the map and they're like, okay, it's concentrated in this area, along the river or whatever.
And with these particular schools and whatnot.
Yeah, which is why I think the theme of season 1, the actual theme song of season 1, was that song that was called "Away from Any Road." I think that's the title, which is kind of.
Great song too.
Yeah, which is kind of the theme of season 1, that all of this was going on in these backwards Louisiana woods and whatnot. Whereas with season 2, there was an actual conspiracy, but it wasn't the cult. It was a conspiracy between these crooked politicians, cops, and mobsters, and they were actually trying to get that railroad thing going on. But then, because of the intervention of the twins and their murder of Casper, that's when they started the domino chain, and that's why nobody really knew who was responsible for Casper's death, because there were multiple parties who were involved. That's why there were so many characters. Well, again, we could probably drop Paul because he was just a highway patrol officer who found the body, but asides that, if you think about it, there were... And here's the thing, the way Casper was found, like, right in the middle of several police territories or jurisdictions or whatever, that actually reminded me of the Zodiac case and David Fincher's film, The Zodiac, because one of the reasons they were not able to catch the Zodiac was because he would kill all of his victims, allegedly. It could have been a copycat, we don't know. But he would kill them all over California, so the victims would end up in different jurisdictions, and a lot of times the cops didn't want to cooperate with one another. It's like, well,
jurisdictions would be pulling rank on each other and nothing would get done.
And then, of course, don't forget that, as Ray himself says towards the end of the season, when they realized that they weren't even meant to crack this case because no one was interested in cracking this case. Like, the entire investigation was just like a false flag operation in order for I forget his actual name, but I'm gonna call him Masuka because he played Masuka on Dexter.
Right.
That was basically him just trying to... Yeah, that was him trying to elevate himself to the position of governor, which technically he does at the very end. So again, all these different elements, they were connected to one another. The difference is the murder itself, it kind of came out of the left field for all of the parties involved. The cops, the politicians, the mafia and whatnot.
The viewer.
So, well, yeah, sort of. But here's the thing: you talked about Chekhov's gun and how if you're gonna set something up, it needs to have a payoff. And they did set a lot of this stuff up, and it did have some payoff. They didn't just decide one episode to go to Hawaii for vacation and whatnot. They were actually trying to investigate this convoluted case. But the problem is, and I think this is a part of the nihilistic theme of True Detective, was that technically it wasn't the mobsters, it wasn't the cops, it was these two kids who were the unfortunate victims of the jewelry robbery that took place many years ago by these cops, and no one could foresee that they would come back because they tried to put these kids through the system, which was another, which by the way was another nice libertarian moment, a big fuck you to CPS, Child Protective Services.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we're gonna put these kids through Child Protective Services and whatever, they're gonna get lost in the system. But then we saw what happened to both the brother and the sister. Here's the thing: was the mystery itself as satisfying as the mystery in season 1? No, but it did make sense. You can't say it's like, well, the cult it didn't have anything to do with anything, and what about this Eyes Wide Shut code? It's like, no. All these stuff was connected, but here's the thing. Real life is not as simple as, going from point A to point B to point C, and then we get to our ending. The 3-point structure of a story is a great way to write a fictional story, but in the real world, it's not always that easy.
It's more like a spider web.
True. And I can definitely agree with that. I mean, yes, everything was connected, and it was interesting as you watch through to kind of make those connections yourself, like, oh, okay, so like, this or that person was in this prostitution ring, and and then they came over here, and then this is also connected to some other guy, and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, that made sense to me, and yes, it was connected, but I feel like if they were gonna go with so many like almost like mini plots with okay, there's this missing girl, and okay, then there's this Black Mountain, and then there's like all this little tiny stuff that it was connected to the thing in the end, but like it was like in kind of like a very, I don't know, it didn't follow it very much. I mean, it made sense it was connected, but it still was confusing to me. So I feel like maybe they could have dropped some of those elements, or they needed a couple more episodes or something, because there were moments when things felt very rushed, or suddenly we would get a exposition dump somewhere that's like, oh yeah, by the way, all this happened and this is how all this is connected, and it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, looking back that makes sense, but it's like now suddenly it's like, here's all the information, and I felt like for some instances they ran out of time.
Yeah, again, they had to cram this entire fucking spiderweb of plot points into 8 episodes.
Yeah, and so I mean, like there were moments when, like, for example, with the mayor's son, I feel like the reason that is because, again, if you have like a plot point or a character that it does something, but it could just as easily be done by another character that you already know, do that. Like, I feel like characters. And Max might have something different to say about this, but I feel like the mayor's son, the reason he was there was just another instance of showing how corrupted all of this stuff is, and this, like, this political ring and all this stuff going on.
This rich mayor's son who's not, totally affluent and just a real prick.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, okay, yeah, it's another instance of this is a really corrupted place, but do we need that, or could we just, go more in depth with other points that also show the corruption instead of tacking on an extra one? What I mean? Exactly.
And that, again, that's where my biggest issue was with the second season. Is it was almost like overwhelming in a lot of ways. It was both overwhelming and underwhelming. Overwhelming amount of little plot points that you have to apparently meticulously follow, and too many people in the main cast, like four or five people if you count Vince Vaughn's wife, Frank's wife, inside of 8 episodes, and it was just like, I don't know, it just didn't have a nice steady flow like the original one did.
One thing I would like to clarify is that, do I think that season 2 of True Detective was perfect? No, not by any means, but I did enjoy it because of those little individual moments and scenes and character interactions and whatnot that we talked about, mainly because you would never see this kind of stuff in any other TV series or even movie. Unless it's, some sort of a tour like Martin Scorsese and whatnot. And one review that I've read of season 2 kind of perfectly encapsulates my opinion, and it went something like this. There is something still lugubrious and overwrought about True Detective, but there's also a mesmerizing style to it. It's imperfect, but well made. And I think, the last part kind of encapsulates perfectly what I think.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, as I'm watching through it a second time and making notes and like trying to, notice things I hadn't watched the first time, I'm enjoying it. It doesn't feel like a chore to watch through this again. I did enjoy it, but after it was over, I just felt confused about a lot of things, and it just made me sit down and think, why didn't this work for me? And I had to explore that. I had to think, okay, what in this story made me not connect to it as much as I did with season 1, barring all of the, really well done stuff in season 1, such as, the nihilism and the way the story was told, cutting back and forth between past and present and everything like that.
Creating the hooks.
Yes, exactly, because the way the story was told, both of them, they were both so different, but I feel like that's not what makes or breaks it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I mean, my thing is like, I watched the first couple episodes and I'm like, I generally thought, like the mystery was going to be going to, in my mind, a more fantastical place. I'm not saying like fantasy as in like, the whole Yellow King thing, but, well, maybe in some ways, yes, but still, the first episode, kind of got my attention, and, it's like, okay, well, now we're going to have to find out who killed Casper, and we're going to go into the dredges of the underworlds and find out who the bad guy is. Oh, but first, Ray has to go talk to his kid, and then, Paul has to work out some issues, and then Annie has to, chastise her sister for, camming and...
See, here's the thing about True Detective. One thing, I like the fact that it's an anthology series and it's, a bunch of different stories, because even though season 2 was imperfect, season 3 is going to be a whole different thing. It's going to be a new location, new characters, new mystery, which might go back to the whole supernatural type of thing. We don't know. And even if season 3 turns out to be even worse than season 2, or it's a complete disaster and whatnot, we're still going to have season 1.
True, yeah.
There's nothing they can do to tarnish season 1, because that story is complete. Whereas with any other show, like I said, they would have tried to capitalize it on and make a sequel and whatnot and blah, blah, blah.
Well,
which is what they're doing with X-Files these days. They're bringing it back again.
Yeah, after 20 years of bringing X-Files back, when no one really asked them to. Not even me. One thing that is kind of interesting, though, is that there's a lot of lingering questions between season 1 and season 2. Max got done explaining a lot of the, subtle connections that I missed when I was doing other things besides watching a TV show like cleaning house. Because like, oh, yeah, I'm bored, get up, do something else, listen kind of here and there. So I admit I did not watch it as intently as I probably should have. But the way that you guys are describing season 2, there's a lot of small mysteries I should actually go back and double check. Whereas like season 1 also has some of those little, they don't really spell it out, but there's a couple of mini mysteries floating around inside of season 1, like, I think there's a couple of internet conspiracies, and I know Max is going to jump on my ass for bringing these up.
Oh, this.
But like, there's some questions on what exactly happened to Marty's daughter. Like, there's, again, it goes back to Chekhov's gun. They show a couple scenes that you don't think anything about, but they're like pictures of like a picture on a refrigerator in Marty's house, and there's a picture of a growth chart on their door where they mark off how their kids are growing, and there's a noticeable gap for the oldest girl. And then on the fridge, there's a picture that looks like the exact same painting on a wall inside of the mental institution that Rust visited to visit the girl who was found in the boxcar later on to figure out who the Yellow King was. And there's a couple of just like lingering, floating mysteries, and people are kind of creating their own conspiracy theories, really, about what's going on. Which, and again, they are conspiracy theories, but some of them are just genuinely interesting. It raises a lot of questions about what's kind of going on behind the scenes, and season 2, to an extent, does the same thing. And I think that's really one of the biggest strengths to True Detective as a whole, is that not everything is always spelled out. But again, season 2, in my mind, it got sunk by too much. I don't know, too many elements.
It's just too much. I mean, it just got sunk by too much, you know. But yeah, I am very intrigued to see where they're going to go with season 3, because hopefully they will look at the good criticisms of the show, not the criticisms that say, "Oh, where is all
Matthew McConaughey? Bring back Matthew McConaughey because the show's not seen without him."
That's just people fucking crying because they're like, "Oh, everything needs to be the same forever," and fuck those people. But if they look at the actual genuine criticisms of season 2, like, hey, maybe there's too many characters, maybe too few episodes, maybe you had too many little
plot points that apparently do contribute, but they weren't weighty enough.
Exactly. It was like it was just too much, and it's. In 8 episodes, a lot of it felt rushed, and then you ended up feeling overwhelmed. So maybe in season 3, they will take that criticism and, improve on whatever writing they're going to be doing for season 3. I'm really, really interested to see where they go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And as imperfect as season 2 was, here we are talking about it for the past hour and 10 minutes.
Yes.
So there's actually a lot of food for thought, as imperfect as it was. And I would rather take that as opposed to season 2 being just a carbon copy of season 1, same themes, just different cult, different characters and whatnot.
Another Scooby-Doo mystery.
Yeah, another Scooby-Doo mystery, and then at the end you just go, well, that was it. That was True Detective season 2. Now
I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for Marty and the Nihilist.
Alright, so, and in conclusion, I just want to stress that no, I didn't think that Season 2 was perfect. I just think that there's a lot of undeserved criticism coming from the more eccentric crowd,
Fuck you, Max.
The crowd that's on the spectrum, if you know what I mean. But
The crowd that cleaned their house while they were watching it.
Go fuck yourselves.
No, but but to prove that I am not a psychophant, there is actually one thing that played a major role in season 1 that we didn't see in season 2, and that actually had me really pissed off. You want to know what it is? Here is a link.
Let me guess, it's going to be a Russ Cole, long-winded nihilist rant. Oh.
What are you talking about? There were tits all over this season, man.
Not tits like that.
Or ass like that.
Mm-hmm. And for those who are listening to us, because it's an audio podcast, you obviously cannot see this, but the link is going to be in the description. Trust us, once you see it, you'll know what we're talking about.
That has no weight to it at all, mister.
What do you mean? Look at how heavy they are.
It has all the weight in the right places.